election on the planet.
There's nothing easy about running for president, I can tell you. It's tough, it's nasty, it's mean, it's vicious, it's beautiful.
And you know what? It's all been done before.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes.
The 1964 presidential campaign between Lyndon Johnson and his challenger Barry Goldwater introduced a vicious new tactic into presidential campaigning: quotemanship. The idea of taking what a candidate says and turning it against them. Johnson created a series of TV ads that portrayed Goldwater as some kind of deranged whack job who, if elected, would destroy all of mankind.
We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Mr. Johnson set out on a political career 27 years ago, a road that led to the White House.
By the time of the 1964 election, Johnson had already been in the White House for a year, having stepped in after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He was seen as the likable heir apparent, but with a hidden agenda.
He knows he's going to win, but what he wants is a huge landslide victory. Because remember how insecure Lyndon Johnson was. He was following the most popular president, maybe to this day. And he didn't just want to win, he really wanted to win by a lot, because to him that meant that the American people loved him, and that therefore he could move forward out from beneath the shadow cast by the JFK presidency.
Since Labor Day, Senator Goldwater has traveled tens of thousands of miles to discuss the issues of the campaign.
Goldwater made the agenda easy for Johnson. His slogan was, "In your heart, you know he's right." And he was, extreme right. Now, Goldwater was an accomplished senator, an ex-Air Force pilot, very close friend of the late JFK, but he didn't care much for Russia or China or any other commie red bastard, and he didn't bother trying to soft-soap it.
And we must make clear that until its goals of conquest are absolutely renounced and its relations with all nations tempered, communism and the governments it now controls are enemies of every man on earth who is or wants to be free.
In terms of articulation, let's compare that to a modern-day candidate with a whole team of speechwriters and researchers at his disposal.
Hey, I'm not saying they're stupid. I like China. I just sold an apartment for $15 million to somebody from China. Am I supposed to dislike them?
Goldwater had all the oratorical tools: alliteration, assonance, litotes, pleonasms, exclamations, epigrams, classical quotes, way more than the average American could absorb. When he accepted the Republican nomination in San Francisco in 1964, he pretty much dropped the Trumpism of his day.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
Hardcore Republicans lapped this up. Finally, a guy not willing to kowtow to the Reds. The more moderate Republicans, however, were genuinely flummoxed. Future President Richard Nixon had to turn and explain to his buddy what Goldwater had just said, like someone who didn't quite get a Frankie Boyle joke. Never mind that he was quoting Cicero, the man who pretty much laid the foundation for practical democracy. Nope, his opponents took the word extremism and milked it for all it was worth. And in no time at all, they had him starring in a one-man version of Mississippi Burning.
We represent the majority of the people in Alabama who hate niggerism, Catholicism, Judaism, and all the isms of the whole world. So said Robert Creel of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. He also said, "I like Barry Goldwater. He needs our help."
Unlike the stentorian Goldwater, Johnson was a folksy, down-home Texan who used the Oval Office to further Kennedy's agenda of progressive social reform, eradicate poverty, promote civil rights, and order lots of slacks.
Joe, is your father the one that makes clothes?
Yes, sir. We're all together.
You all made me some real lightweight slacks. Now, I need about 6 pairs to wear around in the evening when I come in from work. the pockets, when you sit down in a chair, the knife and your money comes out, so I needed at least another inch in the pockets. Now, another thing, the crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight. So when you make them up, give me an inch that I can let out there, because they cut me. They're just like riding a wire fence.
Why, this knife-wielding, pecker-cramped good old boy was determined to spend another 4 years in the White House, and nothing was going to get in his way. Goldwater never had a chance. Systematically bombarded by TV ads that all implied every child in America was doomed.
Do you know what people finally did? They got together and signed a nuclear test ban treaty. But now, there's a man who wants to be president of the United States, and if he's elected, they might start testing all over again.
The best that Goldwater could do to counter this assertion was to drag out the Duke himself, old John Wayne, to provide some kind of weird, cryptic voiceover that frankly made no sense whatsoever.
An umbrella, just that, or the symbol for appeasement. A table, just that, or a sellout abroad. A wall, just that, unless it helps you remember what has happened to 1 billion people in this world, and what can happen to you and to your children.
What in the wide, wide world of sports was he talking about? What, there was a wall somewhere with 1 billion people behind it? The '64 campaign had turned into something that resembled a bitter, divorced couple fighting over custody of their kids.
To many, of course, he is the president first and a candidate second, but his speeches draw resounding cheers.
Lyndon Johnson decided to really turn Barry Goldwater into someone who terrified and horrified Americans, and they did it in a number of different ways. They wrote, it sounds trivial, but they wrote hundreds of letters to the advice columnists of the time, Dear Abby and Ann Landers, claiming that to be Americans who were terrified at the thought of a Goldwater presidency. They even put out a coloring book for little children which portrayed Goldwater in the robes of the Ku Klux Klan. And then they follow up with, of course, the Daisy commercial, which was probably the most effective campaign commercial in history.
Johnson won by a landslide. His campaign had convinced Americans that if Goldwater was elected, he would start a war. And now, firmly re-entrenched in office, what do you think Johnson did? He went to war.
This administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
That's all the Joint Military Chiefs of Staff needed to hear. War. Good God, y'all. In March of 1965, 2 months after being sworn in, Johnson ordered 20,000 troops to launch an offensive against poverty, a small nation on the Indochina Peninsula of Southeast Asia.
Mr. Backlash, Mr. Backlash.
Within 18 months, this incursion had increased to 200,000 troops, all trying to keep North poverty from overrunning South poverty. By 1967, there were more than 500,000 men fighting poverty, and Johnson's support plummeted to the point where he was the most unpopular president in modern times. The man who had got himself elected on a premise of saving America's children was unfortunately watching America's teenagers come home in body bags. Let's imagine for a second an alternative historical scenario. What if Goldwater had won? Let's say that LBJ pulls out of the race due to aggravated scrotal trauma. He chooses instead Hubert H. Humphrey as vice president. Now, Hubert Humphrey is an avuncular hack from Minnesota who's been pining for the job since the end of World War II. Nobody takes him seriously, so Goldwater wins. Goldwater doesn't mess around in Vietnam. He ends that war in 2 weeks flat. The world knows, don't mess with the USA. Unfortunately, his refusal to deal with Arab nations and their oil exports leads to a gas shortage. With the gas shortage, the auto industry stagnates. With no cars, America just becomes this place with a lot of vintage automobiles, really cool looking, but held together with duct tape, also known as Havana chrome, and the auto industry does not progress. Thus, we never get the nimble Ford Bronco in which O.J. Simpson leads the LAPD on a high-speed chase. That chase would have been on foot, and O.J. would have easily outrun the cops because, let's face it, he was one of the fastest runners in the NFL. No OJ, no trial. No trial, no Robert Kardashian, who rose to prominence defending OJ on the murder rap. Robert Kardashian just would have been a two-bit ambulance-chasing chiseler from Los Angeles, and his 3 daughters would be vapid, inconsequential bimbos hanging out at the mall.